Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way back to the theater. Our show will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way back to the theater. Our show will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our show is about to begin.
In a way that
And welcome back, everyone. Please take your seats. We have entered into the final portion of the opening ceremony. And now we would just like to remind you once again, everyone tweeting and posting on the different social media sites, hashtag Climate Week NYC is the hashtag we're using. And remember that we'll be hosting our opening ceremony networking reception right after our closing remarks here in the Times Center. So please do stay and join have some beverages and canapes and some chats with everyone here. And without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce John Podesta, Senior Advisor for International Climate Policy to the President of the United States. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Podesta to the stage.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. And it's actually great to be here with all of you, and happy Climate Week. We're gathering, of course, at the end of summer that's been defined by the climate crisis. July 22nd of this year was the hottest day ever recorded by humans. And we're seeing the consequences of a rapidly warming planet every day. Here in the United States, tropical storms and hurricanes pummeled the Gulf and East Coast. People in Phoenix, Arizona experienced more than 100 days with heat over 100 degrees Fahrenheit this summer. And wildfires, of course, continue to rage out west. Meanwhile, almost 1 million people have been displaced from their home by rains and floods in Nigeria, Mali, and Niger. And flooding in Central Europe has claimed at least 22 lives over the past week and a half. To combat this existential threat, President Biden and Vice President Harris have worked with many of you in this room over the past 4 years to lead the most ambitious and successful climate actions in history, both domestically and internationally. Here in the United States, we've implemented the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate and clean energy in not only the history of America, but the history of the world. That law tackles climate pollution in every economic sector: power, transportation, buildings, industry, agriculture, and forestry. And it's catalyzed a clean energy boom in America by taking a government-enabled but private sector-led approach. Since President Biden took office, private companies have announced more than $425 billion in new clean energy projects. More than $270 billion of that has been announced since the Inflation Reduction Act passed, creating more than 330,000 good-paying jobs. In fact, last year, clean energy jobs grew at twice the rate of the overall economy. It's the best time in history to invest in clean energy. A new solar plant or a wind farm is now cheaper than building a new coal plant just about everywhere on Earth. And in the United States, we've been laser focused on providing guidance for nearly every clean energy tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act to give the private sector the certainty it needs to think big and make long-term decisions. And once those investments are made, once those jobs are created, once communities feel the benefits, It's very difficult, and by the way, very unpopular to try to uproot all of that. And understand, it's not just the United States that's benefiting. The Inflation Reduction Act is boosting innovation and lowering costs for certain clean energy technologies by as much as 25%, according to BCG. That helps speed deployment of clean energy around the globe, slashing emissions everywhere, and helping accelerate progress toward the bold goals set in Dubai to triple renewables, to double efficiency, and by 2050 to triple nuclear power. The Rhodium Group found that for every ton of carbon pollution we reduce here in America because of the Inflation Reduction Act, it will drive reductions of up to 2.9 tons outside the US. But that's not all we're doing to speed global progress. President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement on day one and then made a landmark commitment to reduce US emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2050. Thanks to our historic legislation and new environmental standards from the EPA, the Department of Energy, and others, we're now on the path to achieve that goal. But in order to achieve our 2035 and our mid-century goals, when we need to be taking as much carbon out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it, we need to do more. That's why we've brought the private sector to the table, forged new agreements in Glasgow and Dubai, led the world to commit at COP28 a transition away from fossil fuels, spearheaded the Green Shipping Challenge, and focused attention on non-CO2 gases like methane and nitrous oxide, which receive less attention but are responsible for half of current warming. Countries, and particularly with those countries with the largest economies, will need to continue to scale up public investments in climate action, and the private sector must make climate action part of doing business every day. So in the next few months, from COP16 on biodiversity in Cali, to the G20 in Rio, to COP29 in Baku, the United States will work to build on these achievements with all of you, to raise ambition, to unlock additional climate finance from the private sector, multilateral banks, and from the public sector, accelerate progress towards tripling renewable energy by advancing grids and energy storage, reversing and finally ending deforestation, and help more vulnerable countries and communities adapt to climate change. Here's the bottom line. We're on the right path here in the US and around the world. The momentum is on our side, but we need to accelerate, and that starts now. We need governments and private industry around the world to capitalize on that virtuous circle of innovation, lowering costs, moving faster on advancing new technologies we'll need to reach net zero by mid-century, to mobilize new finance streams, and to make your own historic investments in clean energy. It's time to use every tool in our toolbox to tackle this existential threat of climate change. It's up to every single one of us to move our collective work forward for the benefit of workers, of communities, of our families, and of course, of our planet. Together, I know we can do it. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all that you do. I appreciate being asked to conclude.
So passionate, I loved it. Inspiration. Hopefully you're feeling hopeful about where we're going next. Well, we just heard from one of the key architects of the Inflation Reduction Act, the most ambitious climate law in US history. So let's give him another round of applause here. Fantastic work from the Biden-Harris administration, which brings us to our next session. I am delighted to have the honor to introduce our next round of leaders. Okay, we're going to wait 1 second. All right, we're going to set up first, and then we'll go.
So here we go.
All right.
So
Welcome to some live TV here. So I guess we have some groups delayed. So let me thumb through, see if we can find. I think it is, don't think I have, yes, I have it. Priscilla and, yep. All right, good. All right, we're ready now. We're set up. Sorry for that, guys. And we're back. Hi, everyone. I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams. There we go. All right, our next panel that is coming up is Dr. Eva Riesenhuber, the Global Head of Sustainability at Siemens, Priscilla Sims-Brown, the President and CEO of Amalgamated Bank, Ben Jealous, the Executive Director of the Sierra Club, Luke Triangle, the Secretary-General of International Trade Union Confederation, and I think that's it, right? It's just the four of you? Did we get everybody?
No.
Did I miss someone?
I'll handle it.
You'll
from here.
introduce yourselves. Sorry about that. I don't have your
Yeah.
name on here. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Boy, if you're watching the schedule, we're waiting for Michael Regan, the administrator from the EPA. A little bit of a travel delay. I was to moderate a conversation with him. I'm Bill Ritter, the chair of the board of the Climate Group North America. Angela Barranco was going to be the moderator of this panel, and she's not able to be here as well. And we do not have Ben Jealous from the Sierra Club because he has a train issue. So it seems the later in the day you get, the more this changes. This really is live TV, but I'm honored to have three panelists with me that you've already been introduced to. We're going to have a conversation really about the energy and climate transition happening globally and issues around the workforce. So again, I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper introduction here. Luke Triangle, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. He's been at the forefront of pushing labor issues to the core of climate action, ensuring that workers are not only protected, but empowered in the green transition. Eva Riesenhuber, the Global Head of Sustainability at Siemens AG. Eva leads Siemens' efforts to integrate sustainability into every facet of their business, ensuring that their ambitious decarbonization goals are met while prioritizing people and societal impact. And then Priscilla Sims-Brown, President and CEO of Amalgamated Bank. Priscilla is leading one of the most socially responsible financial institutions, driving positive environmental and social change through innovative banking solutions. And so again, like I said, unfortunately, Ben Jealous from the Sierra Club is not with us. He's on a train trying to make his way here, but he's not going to probably make it by the end of this. If he does, they're going to bring him in a chair and give him a handheld mic. So let's start with these leaders and talk about the opportunities and the challenges facing us in climate action with the workforce. So first question is going to be to you, Luke. You've been a leading voice in making sure that workers are at the center of the transition. At COP28, the ITUC fought to ensure labor issues were central to what's called the Just Transition Work Program. Share with us, if you will, the progress that we've made since Dubai and what priorities we should focus on to guarantee that no worker is left behind as we move forward in this green transition.
Okay, thank you very much for also inviting the labor movement in this debate, because we are talking about millions of workers throughout the world that are affected already today or that will be affected in the next period by this climate transition, by the energy transition and by the climate action. First of all, indeed, for us, the important concept that we introduced already 10 years ago is the concept of just transition. For us, just transition means that we need to deliver on the slogan. Need to deliver on the slogan of no one should be left behind. And a little bit broader, no region should be left behind. And because we all know that the climate action and the energy transition will have an enormous impact on jobs, on skills, on regions, on countries, on communities. And we need to deliver on that if we want to make it successful. And so if we now see what's happening since Dubai, we have the Just Transition Work Program, and it's another step to implement the labor dimension of this whole climate action. And what we see at country level today is indeed the setup and the design of the so-called NDCs. And the NDCs have to be delivered next year, and they are crucial that they are indeed inclusive, and that the design of these NDCs take different actors and stakeholders on board. And what we ask as trade unions worldwide, because we are represented in 170 countries with our organization, is the integration of the concept of social dialogue. Include your social partners, include trade unions, include workers' representatives in the design. Because it's all about not only awareness, but it's also about creating ownership of what you do. And if you want to create ownership of these plans and of these national plans, you don't do that by informing and so-called consulting people at the end of the process. You need to bring them on board from the very beginning onwards, because then they understand also what it is all about. So social dialogue is important in these plans. And what we also see is the concept of social protection. Because indeed, yeah, sorry, but not everyone will have a new job in this transition. And some people might need to go on an early retirement system, for instance. So social protection is important, but also health coverage, because we are discussing now also in the concept of the ILO, the heat stress, the effect of the climate change on workers in the workplace where they work. So health coverage is also a part of the social protection that we promote. And then also, indeed, the recognition of labor rights. Workers do have rights in the workplace. And then I refer to ILO conventions on collective bargaining, on freedom of association, and so on. So, and what we push as trade unions now, and with our worldwide confederation, is on these NDCs, because at the end of the day we have the global programs, but the implementation is at micro level. Macro numbers say, okay, we will have at the end of the process a surplus and more jobs created, all fine, that's the macro. But what I want and what we want are micro solutions on the ground. Where people are affected, do they have a solution? Do we have the social protection? Do we have the skills programs? Do we have the new jobs? So in that sense, the progress is there. Is it going fast enough? We don't think so. We need to step up. We need to have more ambition, because it's all about having the people on board in this process. If we lose them at a certain moment, if we don't have the public support anymore on our climate action, I'm sorry, but then I'm quite pessimistic on the success of our climate agenda in the next years.
Thank you, Dr. Riesenhuber. Siemens has committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. It's an ambitious but an inspiring goal. How are you making sure at Siemens that people, especially your workforce, are at the heart of the transition? And secondly, how is Siemens preparing its employees to thrive in a green economy, particularly in terms of reskilling and workforce empowerment?
I couldn't agree more with Luke saying it is something we have to take everyone along. So when we set our carbon neutrality target back in 2015, there was carbon neutrality in 2030. We just got our SBTi net zero validated, and for the last 2 years, we had a minus 90% physical reduction target until 2030. So we have 5 years left. And this is important because I will explain to you what our workforce actually has to do. Because to get to minus 90% without offsets, our people are changing our buildings, our sites, our factories. So energy efficiency, I mean, it's lucky we have the portfolio for it, but so it's energy efficiency in buildings and industry automation. We have the portfolio. We're also using then solar on the roofs, heat pumps in the ground. That requires renewable integration. We may then need to our smart metering solutions, our microgrid solutions, and we put the e-charging that we also have with it. It's not only proving to our customers it can be done, and it can be done profitably. It is actually also something that our workforce is achieving today. And now, they didn't do that 10 years ago. So how did we get to that point? And I think the key to that is a passion for lifelong learning, which is ingrained in our culture, and really committing to it. So last year alone, we invested more than 400 million in education and training for our own people.
Wow.
And that translates into more than 6 million digital learning hours. And digital to us is important, not only because we're a technology company, but also it empowers everyone from shop floor to top floor to actually choose their own learning path. So it's AI powered. It gives you the option to build on those learning hours where you choose your growth path and the technologies that we need in the future. And the proof is in the pudding. So we got the World Economic Forum Lighthouse Award for Skills First with our learning platform. We're really proud of it to get it recognized as well.
And how many countries are you in?
So we say we're active in most countries, nearly all countries in the world. So we have offices in more than 100 countries. And it's sometimes like being the United Nations. So we have to make sure we balance that with cultural priorities, with regional differences, but ultimately we're united by values.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Priscilla, Amalgamated Bank is known for its strong focus on social responsibility, especially in advancing climate justice. How is the financial sector, and specifically Amalgamated Bank, supporting workers and communities in this transition to a green economy? And how are you ensuring that economic justice is a central part of the shift?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for this opportunity to be on the stage with people who are focused on people. Because, ultimately we talk about the energy transition, but it's really also a transition in many other ways, and our workforce and labor is one. We know a bit about that. Amalgamated Bank is 101 years old, based here in the US, for those of you who are not here. We're in all 50 states, but we're focused, offices focused primarily in Washington, D.C., New York, Boston, and San Francisco, where we really work hard to ensure that the work we do supports the change makers, the commercial clients we have, and across 6 segments that understand the intersection of economic justice and climate justice. They really cannot be disconnected. They must be connected. It does really start with people and with laborers. For us, that means nearly 40% of our lending, as well as something we call property assessed clean energy, which is a security, but still a form of extending access to capital. That 40% of it is in climate-related projects. So we sort of put our money where our mouth is in that respect. More importantly, we focus very heavily on low and moderate income communities. So whether it's greenhouse gas, which we'll talk about later, or whether it's this property assessed clean energy, what they all agree on in principle is the notion that you cannot focus on climate without thinking about the least of these. You can't do it without thinking about creating resilient communities, and the most vulnerable communities are the most important. It's not only important because we want to create resilience for those communities against catastrophe. It's also important because those communities should have a shot at the economic opportunity that this transition provides. They should not be left out of it. Mm-hmm. In most cases, they didn't create the problem. Oh, that's right. They should not be left behind in the solution. They should, in fact, be given the opportunity to advance. And so we see the real clear connection between access to capital for those communities, access to jobs, access to good, clean energy, all the things we care about, clean water, resilience in catastrophes, all of that being critically important. And Amalgamated Bank exists to both provide that directly through our own banking services, but also to help create pathways for other financial institutions to do the same. We were the first to be certified by the Science Based Targets Initiative for our pathway, and we have encouraged many others, and we're very active in the financing of sustainable financing initiatives in the U.S.
So thank you. Those are such important points. It's why I'm so proud of the Inflation Reduction Act and the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think in my lifetime, I've worked a lot on the energy transition part of this, but the Inflation Reduction Act legislatively had the concept that an energy transition didn't mean we had to make false choices about leaving people and communities behind. Yes. And really, if we fully optimize the way that act is written in terms of helping marginalized communities be part of the energy transition, you can get both. You can get a clean energy community, but you can also get community that's benefited from the economics that are inside of the Inflation Reduction Act with that focus on Justice 40 and the marginalized communities. It may be a template for other folks to use around the world, but especially because of our own, the number of marginalized communities. Native American tribes are all considered a marginalized community. They're just flat out considered that. That's just a justice, reconciliation with a lot of things we treated in the past where we had other kinds of transitions, but we didn't think about the economic transition that could make those communities healthy. The Inflation Reduction Act really does in such a better and different way. So thanks for your answer and for your insights.
I agree.
Luke, we're coming back to you. I've heard some incredible insights, but there's a lot more to impact, is what this says. No, I just said that, only I ad-libbed it. Number of governments are making significant efforts to ensure that the green transition is a just one. In your view, which countries or regions are leading the way, and what can we learn from them to ensure workers' rights and opportunities are protected? And in asking that question, even in your first question, I sat here thinking, what a difficult job you have, because it is not just that it's country by country or region by region, it's in many cases state by state or county by county in some places, and how people react to the labor force and the design of the labor force can very much depend on sort of the politics of the moment. And so you have to ensure that just transition can somehow transcend the politics of the moment.
Yeah. So we have indeed our trade unions on the ground in many countries in the world. We push them, we train them, we push them to absolutely be involved in the climate agenda of their country. And we do have a lot of examples where it's happening today. That goes from Colombia, where we have good practice today with the current government, with the current political leadership on involving stakeholders in the design of the national plans and the impact that it will have on the country and on a number of sectors. We do have the same experiences in, for instance, South Africa or in Nigeria, where also there trade unions are involved, but not only trade unions, civil society and communities as a whole. We do have in Europe, for instance, the good example in Spain, where you have in the north extractive industries, coal mining, steel production, and so on, and where you have negative effects, so where they try to indeed bring in new jobs and new industries. And I mean, we need to say that the minister and the government that is responsible for that policy, the minister in particular, she will now become the vice president of the European Commission, specifically responsible in Europe and in the European Union for the just transition implementation at the level of the EU. So, I mean, it's an example. But the point is, all these plans are important, all these talks are important, but the challenges are really enormous. Right. Because we are talking about the extractive industries, we are talking about fossil fuel-driven energy-intensive industries. We are talking about the entire energy sector. We are talking about parts of the automotive sector. So millions of workers are involved, hundreds of millions worldwide are involved. And yeah, what we see today, and let me now maybe focus on one continent, and that's now one, just as an example, Europe, is that we see that in a number of countries there, we see indeed new jobs are created, the new investments are taking place. Countries like Sweden are leading, countries like Denmark are leading. Germany, certain parts of Germany are certainly also making this transition, the Netherlands. But what we see at the same time is that in countries also part of the European Union, like Bulgaria, we see a massive depopulation going on today. There is closures, there is no job. So, and that's my concern. I want to discuss the macro numbers, fine, but I want to see the micro solutions. And if the solution is, yes, your father or your mother that is hit by this energy transition, which will have maybe a good social package and early retirement or whatever, but the consequence is that the children, the sons or the daughters, will not have a job anymore in the community where they have been growing up, and they have to move out of the region and even of the country, then I think we do have a problem. And I'm not against mobility of workers, let me be very clear, but if it's forced, because that's in the reality, if it's forced, it's not okay. So we need to not only have the slogan, no one should be left behind, also no region should be left behind, because it's also regional policies that will be crucial in our success or not on just transition.
Thank you. It's a real sequitur to the question I'm going to ask you regarding Siemens, because sometimes it's a false choice, economic concerns versus environmental concern, but certainly there are people who are experiencing difficult economic times, and that may cause their concerns, their environmental concerns, to sort of be subsidiary to the economic concerns. How does Siemens deal with that on a worker-by-worker basis and keep them bought in to the green transition when economic circumstances may sometimes overwhelm them?
It's a completely fair question. So while on the meta level, we all agree that in order to have like 10 million people on the planet in 2050, in peace and prosperity, we need to have a healthy planet.
Yep.
So the meta level is not the problem. Then you go further down, and when you look on your micro level, I'm the first one to agree that there are many people who have to be concerned about their economic welfare, and they just simply don't have the choice to focus on the environment. Now, somewhere in between, we as companies can help, and also as NGOs, and obviously the governments have to look after this, and every player has to do it. But we have to focus on where our sweet spot is. We already talked about our own workforce and the motivation they're bringing towards that topic as well. If you think on societal impact, like before I go to the community work we're doing, I think it's important to also realize the impact that we have through the portfolio, because it opens a different perspective. So when we look, for example, at our mobility, transportation, our trains, our rail infrastructure, in Egypt alone, we're supporting building a 2,000-kilometer high-speed rail system for the first time. We're connecting 60 cities in Egypt for the first time. That gives 90% of the Egyptian population access to public transportation. And it creates 40,000 jobs. That is societal impact. So let's not forget what we do through our portfolio, because it also explains the motivation of our people, which explains what they're driving in our corporate citizenship program. Because here we really focus on 3 core pillars. One is access to education, because education empowers, empowering gives control, and that makes people feel safe. Then you have access to technology, which is our superpower. We focus on science, technology, engineering, and we look after the communities that we work and live in. We're doing that with partners. So just because I'm a data person, just giving you some data. In Brazil, we trained last year 40,000 students on Industry 4.0. In China, we go into rural areas. We reach 20,000 pupils in rural areas. In India, we have a project that's been running for a long time, but we partner with 160 schools. So we do believe in education and empowering, and we do believe we have to take the communities with us in which we work and live and empower them the best way that we can.
So you are a data person. That was a lot.
I'm a data person.
That was really good, so thank you. Priscilla,
Very good.
again, Amalgamated Bank led the charge on climate justice in the financial industry, and it can be a balancing act for organizations. So talk a little bit about how the bank has done this on sort of an individual level so that the green transition promotes economic justice, promotes equity. Talk about initiatives that you put in place that have to do with workers' rights and that create safe, prosperous employment opportunities.
I like your reference, Doctor, to it's both what you do yourself and it's also the ecosystem that you create. I think that's a really critical point. It's a critical point because no matter what your size is, and we're the 122 out of 4,600 banks in the US, but no matter what your size is, the largest or the smallest, your own portfolio or your own footprint is never big enough to affect the kind of change and the kind of time that we have and the urgency that this hour presents for all of us. So for Amalgamated, it starts, as I said, with who we are. We were born out of the labor movement 100 years ago. Eastern European laborers, they were called in New York at that time the textile workers, the needle trades. And they couldn't be banked. They were immigrants with no history in this country, and so they couldn't be banked, and they were bold enough to start their own bank as well as their own union, the Amalgamated Clothing Workers. We've kept that name, even though it's a mouthful, because it's such a nod to this important legacy. But somewhere along the way, this group of people and their descendants in the bank decided that if you're going to really make a difference for people who don't otherwise have the advantage of intergenerational wealth transfer in this country, then you need to expand this. And so now we're the bank for climate organizations, everyone from the Sierra Club on down to your sort of local community climate group. We're the bank for social justice organizations, racial justice organizations, economic justice organizations. That could be Color of Change, Planned Parenthood, the Movement for Black Lives. It's all of the organizations who we believe are making progressive change in this country. Our role is to focus on two things. One is access to capital, moving money to the front lines of change. The second is making sure that people understand the intersectionality between all of these. In other words, you can't be focused on one and not be focused on all. You don't just talk about labor. You talk about climate and its impact on workers and their abilities. You at Siemens do the same thing as you just said. So I think that's really important. And in this country, as in I think around the world, if you would agree, the financial services industry has either directly or indirectly exacerbated the problem or in some ways created pathways to solutions. And so our role is to focus on those pathways. And we do it a number of ways. So with our own people, we established the first minimum wage at 15, then at 20. Now we don't have anyone under 25, and we don't talk about minimum. We talk about living wages in the communities where our employees live and work. We support the movement. We recognize that laborers, when they're on the picket line, need access to capital, and so do unions during that period of loss of capital. So we do quite a lot of financing of that. We make sure that community banks, those small banks, the ones that are, we don't see the direct benefit from, but we make sure that those banks are supported. We partner with them in a number of ways, and CDFIs in this country, again, to move money to the front lines of change. I could go on, but we do a number of, we live and breathe every day. We have people who come from these segments, and every day they are working with these segments to advance their causes.
Well, thank you. We're out of time here, so I really do appreciate all three of you, all of your insights, and the work you do every day for workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to do a little musical chairs here real quick.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much. That was phenomenal. Thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause here. So I think we're just going to take away two chairs, and we should be pretty good here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guests here very slowly again as they clean up the stage and rearrange here. We have, of course, Michael Regan, who is the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Administrator Regan has brought bold leadership to one of the most critical institutions in the U.S. in the fight against climate change. I'd also like to reintroduce Governor Bill Ritter Jr., who I did not give enough to last time, and chair of Climate Group's board in North America, a true champion for clean energy and sustainable development during his time as governor of Colorado, and also now as his role as educator and board chair. Please help me in welcoming both of them to the stage. Gentlemen.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
I'm just getting my paper, my papers organized here. Sorry about that, Administrator.
Yeah.
So as I said before, we have the pleasure today being joined by Michael Regan. He's the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, has been for the entire time that the Biden administration has been in place. Michael came from North Carolina, where you'd led the environmental, I'm not sure what the agency is called, but where you'd led that there. And so I've done this for a long time, this kind of work. Yes. And I would say the last 4 years have been among the most active period ever in the life of the EPA, even from its very start. I got to be there the day that the administrator announced the new rules on coal and gas, and I was just so impressed with you and with the spirit in the room. So we're going to talk about climate leadership. Like I just said, it's been a busy, busy time for you, and I want you to reflect a little bit on that now, almost 4 years of your leadership inside of an administration that's demonstrated so much climate leadership nationally.
Well, thank you for having me today. And as I reflect on the last 3.5, 4 years, it's just humbling to be a part of so many historic moments. President Biden challenged us from day one to not be in crisis response mode, but think about opportunity, the opportunities that this moment presents to us. And so at EPA, we have tried to seize the opportunity to look at how we construct our technology standards to match our opportunities with technology and data and the willingness of the markets and the private sector to really have an all-hands-on-deck approach. We understood from day one we couldn't regulate our way out of this situation. And so the public-private partnerships, the grasp of markets and technology, the investments from historic legislation like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act really have positioned us as a country to be globally competitive across the board. And so it's an honor to lead an agency that's responsible for regulating and ensuring that every single person in this country, no matter their zip code or the color of their skin or how much money they have in their pockets, have access to clean air, clean water to drink, and an opportunity to live a healthy and competitive life.
We do some work with governors around the country and with other groups doing work with governors. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant that gave every state the ability to have a planning grant to figure out how to spend the money was this unique thing that the EPA has actually done, and I think making a very big impact. Just reflect for a moment on that as one of your wins.
Well, Governor, I think that the federal government has a role, but so does every level of government, and so does the private sector. And, I would never pretend as administrator of EPA, the federal government has more knowledge about what Colorado needs. I think we look for partnerships. And so this was a historic opportunity to take hundreds of millions of dollars and not be paternalistic about it, but think about how we could get these hundreds of millions of dollars into the hands of people who have been grappling with these issues for decades. And so when we look at programs like the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, it's a significant opportunity for us to put hundreds of millions of dollars into the hands of governors and mayors and nonprofits so that they could tackle the challenges that their communities are facing on day one. I've really enjoyed the partnerships with both Republican and Democratic governors, despite what you hear coming out of Washington, D.C. When you travel the country as much as I do, when you meet with as many mayors and governors as I do, people are ready to put capital to work to solve problems for the people. And there's no better partners than governors and mayors. And that program gives us the opportunity to leverage that entrepreneurial spirit.
The other thing about the Inflation Reduction Act that I just mentioned prior to this discussion with you is how important economic justice is and how important marginalized communities are treated inside of the Inflation Reduction Act. I know the Carolinas were a place where the environmental justice movement was born.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about your sense of the important viewpoint that the Biden administration has where justice is concerned.
Well, let me just start by saying leadership starts at the top. And I work for a president who is the first sitting president to utter the words environmental justice during not one but two State of the Union addresses. We have a vice president who has focused on environmental justice all of her career. And so coming into this administration, I believe we had a jump on the issue. The president and the vice president have pushed very hard. I restructured EPA and created a new national program office solely focused on environmental justice and external civil rights with 200 employees whose job it is to focus on environmental justice every single day. We received historic resources from the Inflation Reduction Act, $3 billion to focus on environmental and climate justice. These are historic times we're living in, and I've partnered with those who have been in the environmental justice movement for the last 30 to 40 years to be sure that they get access to the resources. One good example is Dr. Robert Bullard, who many consider to be the father of the environmental justice movement. He is a professor at Texas Southern University, a historically black college and university, and we awarded Dr. Bullard and TSU $50 million to look at grant competitions all across this country. It's a demonstration that this administration knows how to get the money into the hands of those who know what to do with it, but it's also a demonstration that we're not going to be paternalistic about it. We're going to make sure that our communities, our HBCUs, those who have been disenfranchised have an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And I credit President Biden for focusing on fence line communities, and I credit Vice President Harris for working on legislation as a senator that showed up in the bipartisan infrastructure law and in the Inflation Reduction Act.
And I would say Native American tribes as well, something that we know a lot about in the American West because of the number of tribes, but really all over the country treated as marginalized communities was such an important way of including them in this economic and energy transition.
Oh, absolutely. We have worked on our nation-to-nation relationships from day one, greatly respect tribal sovereignty. And when we look at these black and brown and tribal and low-income communities, they have been prioritized. I was very proud just 2 weeks ago to be in Arizona with Secretary Holland, focused on making a $300 million grant program announcement solely focused on our tribal communities. So listen, I think this administration has set the bar extremely high. But this administration also is the first administration to invest so heavily into all of these frontline communities that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
So we've talked a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act and really about air issues, but you guys deal with water issues too. You have the Clean Water Act that's part of it. Lead pipes as an example of something that I think you've made great progress on in this 4-year period. Can you discuss that, Administrator?
You know, that's a program that is near and dear to my heart. One of the first trips I took as administrator was to Milwaukee, Wisconsin with the vice president. And we met with a mother, Deanna, and her 10-year-old son, Aiden. My son's 10 years old as well, so this really struck me, but that Aiden had been drinking lead-poisoned water for a number of years, and he's still living with the health impacts of that. The vice president and I have traveled all across the country. We have close to $14 billion solely focused on eradicating lead service lines across the country. And we're also going to propose or finalize a rule, our lead and copper rule, that will ensure between those billions of dollars of investment and the regulations that we eradicate lead pipes 100% within a 10-year window. That's a pledge that the president made when he was campaigning, and that's a promise that this administration is going to keep. We know that low-income black and brown and tribal communities are disproportionately impacted by lead. We know what lead does to a child's ability to learn. We know that it reduces their competitiveness, reduces their cognitive abilities, creates all kinds of internal issues that child will struggle with for the rest of their lives. So I credit President Biden for saying from day one, 100% lead pipe removal within a 10-year window, and we're going to do it.
It's in. Not sure the moderator should clap, but I just did. But we're 20 seconds till time, so I just want to thank you on behalf of the people of this country and on really behalf of the people of the globe, because of the leadership that the United States can demonstrate to other places around the globe, that you have not only taken this challenge on in such an important way, but that you tied it to justice. And I think the fact that we don't have to make a false choice between a growing economy and addressing environmental and climate concerns is such an important example for the world.
Yes.
Please thank the administrator for his work.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
Audience, please give a hearty round of applause to the panel and join me in welcoming Lorena Della Giovanna, SVP and Executive Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer, and Chief Human Resources Officer, Hitachi, and Helen Clarkson, CEO, Climate Group.
It's great to be back on stage with you, especially joined by you, Lorena, for this conversation on how businesses can and must play a role in solving the climate crisis. At Climate Greece, we've really long believed in the power of building these big, influential networks, but crucially also holding organizations to account for their commitments. And we know that sometimes it can see like climate and corporate revenue might be at odds, but we also know that that's often far from true. So start by telling us your story. What role do you believe large businesses like Hitachi, with a complex value chain, a founding which goes back to the 1900s, why should you be leading us on climate action?
Yeah, thank you, Helen, and hi, everyone. Although I think that everyone should play a role because this is a massive transformation and even huge conglomerate as Hitachi can't do alone, I do think that company of the size like us should lead this transformation. If we look at Hitachi, we are developing and producing so many diverse technology. We operate in so many different industries, and we have a global presence. So directly or indirectly, we basically touch the life of almost all the population. So this is something where we feel the responsibility, but on the other side, we'd also see a massive opportunities. And I would say that this approach is there since the foundation. The Hitachi founder in 1910 decided to develop the first original Japanese technology, and he did it at a time where Japan was using technology mainly imported from abroad. And the reason why he did it is, yes, of course, because we want to grow the business. But on the other side, he had the main focus on supporting the Japanese economy to grow. And this philosophy remains across the company until today. The sustainability strategy is very much integrated in the strategy of the group. We have clear targets and KPIs, and those targets are also linked to the executive compensation because we wanted to make sure that we keep these commitments regardless of how the business will go. In terms of climate, we have targets both for our own operation. We wanted to be carbon neutral by 2030 for scope 1 and 2, and by 2050 across the whole value chain. And we are working with our suppliers and customers to achieve these targets. At the same time, we also have targets to contribute to decarbonize our society and the customers. And we have defined 100 million tons per year by 2024. And the way we do is through our quite wide product portfolio. So from the transportation of trains to the energy generation, energy transmission, and so on. And we also look at the circular economy with the three main topics on innovation in the product. So the way we are eco-design our products in order to make them more green. in the way we innovate in the manufacturing process, and we are also installing recycle facilities, and in the way of we do business model.
Yeah.
So we are a very product-oriented company, but we are trying to transform ourselves to more service provider.
So with all that going on, how do you make sure that climate stays top of the agenda at Hitachi?
Well, first of all, we are a public company, so our action plan is monitored, and we look at our strategy not just from a top-down approach, but we work also together with our customers, investors, and partners. So we take a number of stakeholder dialogues. As I said, we link the sustainability KPIs to the executive compensations. We participate to this kind of forum. We are a member of the Climate Leader Alliance of the World Economic Forum. We are working with the WBCSD. So we are showing this commitment because, as I said, if we ignore that, basically we will not survive. And that, I think this is the same for many other companies.
Yeah. And how do you, or how does Hitachi see sustainability as a value creator? And can you give us some examples of where sustainability has generated business value?
That's a very important question because, the challenge we face to move from, is it just a cost? Is it just a pain? Is it just compliance? Or it is really an opportunity? And I would say that investors are now using ESG as a driver for decision in how to invest, in which business to invest. Our customers are basically asking a long list of questions in order to meet the sustainability requirements. And if you don't meet, you are not part of the deal. If we look at the talent, especially the young generation wants to work for a company with a clear purpose. So we are really in a kind of talent war, and we are a shortage of labor, and this is absolutely critical, plus all the new regulation and disclosure requirements. So just for that, this is something that it cannot be ignored. At the same time, what we have done, we have designed a framework in order to show that sustainability it can increase the enterprise value. And we defined, for example, for the climate, 6 levers: 3 for the decarbonization of our own operation, and 3 for the business growth. For the decarbonization of our operation is basically cost saving because we create more efficiency in the way we produce our products. Avoiding costs for taxes. We know that the carbon tax is coming, especially from Europe, so it's very important. And the other one is avoiding cost for capital. For the growth, we basically look at 3 main levers. One is the green premium, because we are trying to make our product, as I said, greener, because we are applying eco-design. Innovation. The current technology will not be enough to achieve the net transition, so Hitachi is investing a lot in innovation for new green technology and the new business model in order to support the customer to avoid to invest upfront, and we just sell our products as a service or subscription base.
Yeah. And looking forward, my final question, what do you think will be the most important factor in driving systemic change as a climate community?
Collaboration and innovation. And when I talk about collaboration, it's really collaboration between big corporations, policymakers, or regulators. I make you an example. There are 3,000 gigawatts of renewable energy projects waiting in the connection grid list. And the reason is because we need the framework to make and simplify the bureaucracy. So as Hitachi, we are investing a lot in our power grid business. We are investing $6 billion in order for the next 3 years to enhance manufacturing capacity and to invest in R&D and to make sure that we can support the grid to be more resilient, more stable, and so on. But we can't do alone. If we don't have these policies in place, we cannot make our commitment as an action. So collaboration first, and innovation, because the transformation we are facing is historic in terms of size and impact. We talk about a 12-digit of investment per year, so this is really massive, and we need a new solution. And the only way to do is really to bring together different opinions and ideas, and this is what we have been doing in the company. And last but not least, I think that we should really start doing action together. I remember at COP26 3 years ago, there was a 15-year-old finalist of the Earthshot Prize. And in the speech, she said that, first of all, she reminded us how much the young generation is really determined to take action on climate. But then she looked at us and said, with the full respect, I would like all of you to stop talking and start doing. And I think that this is the only way we have really to do.
Great, thank you. And we'll take that advice now and bring this to an end. But Lorena, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll hand back to Stephanie. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. And please join me in thanking Lorena and Helen for their insights. Of course, the consensus between corporate profitability and climate can be a tricky balance. So we thank Lorena for her efforts there. Up next, we'll be joined by Sonia, Guajajara, the nation's first minister of indigenous people of Brazil, and a real defender of the Amazon and the fight for climate justice. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Boa noite a todas, a todos. Uma honra estar aqui falando para toda essa plateia. Nós ouvimos várias falas sobre a emergência climática que estamos vivendo e também sobre o ritmo que tem crescido inundações, secas e incêndios extremos no mundo. De fato, o compromisso é de não ultrapassarmos 1,5 graus de aumento da temperatura, porque não teríamos mais como controlar as mudanças da natureza. Este é um parâmetro científico. Os fenômenos climáticos que eram esperados daqui a 10 anos já estão acontecendo hoje. O que a natureza está nos falando, pelo menos desde o ano passado, com o crescimento dos eventos extremos, é que talvez 1,5 grau já esteja defasado.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We have heard several lines about the climate emergency. We are experiencing about the pace that floods, droughts, and extreme fires have grown in the world. In fact, the commitment is not to exceed 1.5 increase in the Earth's temperature, because we would no longer be and to control the changes in nature. This is the scientific parameter. The climate phenomenon that we are expected in 10 years are already happening today. What nature is telling us, at least since last year, with the growth of extreme events, is that perhaps 1.5 is already outdated.
Mas quero trazer aqui uma mensagem de esperança. Os povos indígenas de todo o mundo estão vivos e seguem resistindo. São os portadores dos conhecimentos tradicionais necessários para fazer a gestão sustentável da vida no planeta. E seguimos lutando.
But I want to bring a message of hope. Indigenous peoples around the world are alive, and we continue to resist. We are the barriers of the traditional knowledge that is necessary to make the sustainable management of life on the planet, and we continue to fight.
O impacto do CO2 na camada de ozônio não é o único limite natural da Terra. Também a perda da biodiversidade e aumento da desertificação, a redução das espécies da fauna e flora, a acidez dos oceanos, os ciclos de fósforo e nitrogênio, dentre outros. Todos estes limites se interagem e, uma vez ultrapassados, se fortalecem no impacto das mudanças.
The impact of CO2 in the ozone layer is not the only natural limit on the Earth. also the loss of biodiversity and increased desertification, the reduction of fauna and flora, species, the acid in the oceans, the phosphorus and nitrogen cycles, among the others. All these limits interact and once overcome are strengthened in the impact of changes.
Por isto, escutar os sinais e sintomas da natureza é muito mais que ver os óbvios sintomas do seu mal-estar e de sua temperatura elevada. É ter abertos os canais sagrados que nos conectam com os espíritos e criaturas vivas, que são nossos pais e irmãos no planeta Terra. A nossa capacidade de ouvir a Mãe Terra demonstra que falar em justiça climática não é um tema qualquer, algo que pode vir no momento posterior à implementação das soluções.
Therefore, listening to the signs and symptoms of the nature is much more than seeing the obvious symptoms that's in higher temperatures. It is to have opened the sacred channels that connect us with the spirits and living creatures who are our parents and brothers in the planet Earth. Our ability to listen to Mother Earth demonstrates that talking about climate justice is not just any topic, something that can come at a time later than implementation of the solutions.
De outro lado, ainda tem muita gente que não está disposta a mudar, que quer seguir lutando com a destruição do planeta, com o aumento das desigualdades e desastres. Existem negacionistas e existem aqueles criminosos que impõem a destruição em nome do lucro.
On the other side, there are still many people who are not willing to change, who wants to continue providing the destruction of the planet, with increase in inequalities and disasters. There are deniers and there are those criminals who impose destruction in the name of profit.
O Brasil, por exemplo, foi impactado fortemente por incêndios que atingiram todos os biomas de forma quase simultânea. Uma parte disto é reação da natureza, mas a maior parte é a ação criminosa dos setores que não querem ver o Brasil do presidente Lula assumindo seu papel de protagonismo no enfrentamento à emergência climática.
Brazil, for example, was strongly impacted by fires that hit all biomes, almost simultaneously. A part of this is nature's reaction, but for the most part is the criminal action for the sector that not want to see the President Lula's Brazil's assuming the leading role in confronting the climate emergency.
E é um setor grande ainda, que desmata e põe fogo. Um setor que segue assassinando nossos parentes indígenas, como fizeram semana passada com Neri e Kaiowá, que derrama agrotóxico que impactam comunidades, destroem o ciclo das águas doces dos rios e a saúde de toda a população. Setor que se une aos que avançam na mineração desenfreada, que sufoca e acaba com os nossos bens comuns, sem construir alternativas. E seguem produzindo com sangue Yanomami e Munduruku, anéis e relógios de ouro.
And still is a big sector that deforests and sets fire, a sector that continues to murder our relatives, indigenous, as they did last week with Neri Kaiowá, that spills pesticides that impact communities, destroy the fresh water, cycle of rivers, and the health of the entire population. Sectors that joins those who advance in unbridled mining, which suffocates and ends our common goods, with building alternatives and continues to produce, without building alternatives and continues to produce, with Yanomami and Munduruku blood, gold rings and watches.
E falando no território Yanomami, é possível ver muito da reação desesperada destes setores, porque vem agora o Brasil um país comprometido. Nós estamos conseguindo destruir o garimpo ilegal num dos maiores territórios indígenas do Brasil, numa luta árdua, após anos de negligência estatal, como agora a redução de 96% na abertura de novas áreas de garimpo e 76% da redução do garimpo ilegal no território Yanomami.
And speaking of the Yanomami territory, it is possible to see much of the desperate reaction of these sectors, because they now see Brazil as a committed country. We are managing to destroy illegal mining in one of the largest indigenous territories in Brazil, in an arduous struggle after years of the state negligence, such as the 96% reduction in the opening of new mining areas and 76% reduction in mining in the Yanomami territory.
Os problemas não estão só no Brasil, estão em todos os países desenvolvidos que ainda se recusam a reduzir de forma mais drástica o uso de combustíveis fósseis, a alcançar patamares razoáveis dos compromissos financeiros assumidos, a não reconhecer a repartição de benefícios aos conhecimentos tradicionais, mantendo nossos conhecimentos ainda alvo para a expropriação histórica.
The problems are not only in Brazil. They are developing countries that still refuse to more drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels to reach reasonable levels and financial commitments made, not to recognize the distribution of benefits to traditional knowledge, keeping our knowledge target for historical expropriation.
São vários os temas ainda travados no conjunto das negociações ambientais, que mostram o tamanho do nosso desafio. E termino com um deles. A Mãe Terra já nos disse que está em processo de transição. Mas pelas orientações de nossos sábios e seus conhecimentos em todo o mundo, venho dizer que esta não pode ser uma transição qualquer. Precisa ser uma transição justa, onde se enfrente desigualdades e promova a inclusão. Porque sem isto, os negacionistas continuarão crescendo com seu discurso, mobilizando populações e fazendo avançar os discursos mentirosos de ódio e exclusão.
There are several themes still stuck in the sets of environmental negotiations that show the size of our challenge and end with one. One of them is the Mother Earth is already told us that is in the process of transition. But due to the guidance of our relatives and the knowledge around the world, I come to say that this cannot be just any transitions. It needs to be a fair transition, where inequalities are faced and inclusion is promoted. Because without this, deniers will continue to growl with their speech, mobilizing populations and advancing discourses of liars, hatreds, and exclusion.
E é por meio da justiça climática que os povos indígenas podem ser tratados como autoridades climáticas, como agentes cruciais para que as soluções sejam encontradas e implementadas.
It's through climate justice that indigenous people can be treated as climate authorities, as crucial agents for solutions to be found and implemented.
Espero que desta semana saiamos com iniciativas ainda mais consolidadas a respeito, avançando em parcerias e projetos ousados. Saiamos mais dispostos a mudar o rumo que a humanidade ainda está tentando impor ao planeta.
I hope that this week we will live with even more consolidated initiatives in this regard, moving forward in partnership and bold projects. Let's have more willing to change the curse that humanity is still imposing on the planet.
E essa mudança precisa ser assumida por todos, por todas, por todos nós. Bancos, empresas, sociedade civil e governos.
This change needs to be assumed by everyone, banks, companies, civil society, and governments.
Nós, povos indígenas, já estamos assumindo a nossa parte. E você?
We, indigenous people, are already doing our part. And you?
Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Please join me again in thanking Minister Guajajara for her impactful and insightful speech. And I'm sure you can all agree that the defense of nature is central to our fight on climate. So it is pretty phenomenal to hear from one of the most respected environmentalists in the world. I am now delighted to have the opportunity to invite our final presenter to the stage. She is a leader in every sense of the word, and she has become a global symbol of compassion, resilience, hope, and bold and decisive action. And with that said, please join me in welcoming Dame Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and trustee of the Earthshot Prize, to the stage to close us out. Hi, thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I greet you in the Indigenous language of my home, Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the same way that I did when I first spoke at Climate Week some 6 years ago. When I stood in front of you then, I was a Prime Minister and an optimist. It feels like a lifetime ago. It was before New Zealand had a domestic terror attack that took the lives of 51 members of our Muslim community. Before there was a volcanic eruption, before a global pandemic and the economic crisis that ensued. It was also a time when global sights were set firmly on 1.5 degrees, rather than it now appearing increasingly in our rearview mirror. A lot has happened. And yet, for all of that, much remains the same, including my optimism. Now, some in the climate space will tell you that such optimism is at best naive or at worst dangerous. I suspect that's because environmental work, optimism is being interpreted to be optimism bias, the tendency to overestimate a positive outcome rather than accept the reality of a negative one. I see things differently. Rather than suffering from optimism bias, many of us in this room have simply maintained our expectations. A belief not only that things can be better, but they must be. That politicians, policymakers, the private sector, financial institutions will respond to the challenge in front of us through the sheer magnitude of what will happen if they don't. And that if we lower our expectations and resign ourselves to unstoppable increases in temperature, we will lose the pressure needed to force real change. No, I do not suffer optimism bias. I unapologetically have an expectation bias, and so should all of you. I come from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a Pacific nation. It is both where we are, but is also who we are, with ties to Polynesia extending back hundreds of years. The Pacific continues to disproportionately face rising sea levels, salinization, ocean acidification, dwindling freshwater supply, more frequent and increasingly intense tropical storms, and much more as a result of climate change. I've personally had the privilege of visiting many places in the Pacific, including Tuvalu. Tuvalu is a small country with a proud and close community, where climate change is not a theory of the future, but a lived experience. NASA says sea level rise in Tuvalu is 1.5 times faster than the global average, with an average elevation of around 3 meters above sea level. Nearly all of its homes, schools, kindergartens, churches, businesses, infrastructure will be underwater during a high tide by 2050. It's not just a loss of an island, it's a loss of culture, a way of being, a people's spiritual place in the world. Now, I use Tuvalu as a living example of the struggle our region faces because sadly its experience is not unique, with the World Bank estimating 49 million people in East Asia and the Pacific will be forced to leave their homes due to climate change. Where is the expectation bias that will force change on behalf of Tuvalu? And how have we possibly found ourselves in this place? Now, some will tell you that climate change has become too political, too polarized, and that is one of the reasons progress is too slow. But a 2024 UN Development Programme study shows over 80% of the global population want their governments fighting the climate crisis faster. This includes 73% in China, 77% in South Africa and India, 85% in Brazil, 88% in Iran, and up to 93% in Italy. And in the US, where the issue is perceived as hyper-partisan, 66% of people still wanted more movement more quickly. Now, these numbers tell us two things: that at its core, people expect politicians to get on with responding to the threats we all face, and that climate is being weaponized to divide people where it shouldn't. But a survey like this also tells us that we just need to get on with it, because an overwhelming majority of people expect us to. And regardless of who believes or the smaller minority who are skeptical, what matters are the results. Policies that make people's lives better, more secure, saves them money, and also happens to cut emissions. The temptation sometimes is to win the battle, convince people of the rightness of our climate argument when we need to win the war. But the UN Development Programme survey also showed it's not just domestically that people expect us to crack on. 86% of people want to see their countries set aside geopolitical differences and work together on climate change. Now, that might surprise you. The world is hardly presenting itself as unified on anything at present. There is a devastating war in Europe and in the Middle East, debate over things that felt previously agreed, like the Sustainable Development Goals. Geopolitical disputes are playing out in just about every quarter of foreign policy. But we have been here before. And we have risen above it before too. And in a place critical to the climate challenge, Antarctica. Antarctica has always held a special place for me. I was lucky enough to visit just 2 years ago. A number of things strike you in Antarctica: the vastness, the isolation, and a silence that is unlike anything I have ever experienced. And yet it's defenseless to the non-physical invasion shrinking its territory. Since the 1970s, the Southern Ocean has absorbed as much as 75% of the excess heat created by humans and 40% of the carbon dioxide. Today, it's losing around 150 billion tons of ice each year, the equivalent to almost 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of ice every second. And with each day that its borders regress, so too do the borders of our home countries as the sea level rises and coasts erode. Antarctica has always been a place where politicians, diplomats, and civil society have risen above the geostrategic disputes of the day. In 1959, in the midst of the Cold War, amongst Soviet demands for troops to be removed from Berlin and the fallout of the Cuban Revolution, the US, Soviet Union, and 10 other nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, safeguarding Antarctica for scientific research and outlawing military bases or operations there. 1980 was not just defined by the prior year's revolution in Iran, the ongoing oil crisis, or Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. It is also when the little-known Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources was adopted to establish rules on krill catch and other fishing activity. And then in 2016, the Ross Sea Project saw countries with vastly different interests come together to create a sanctuary free from commercial exploitation. Historically, we have all been Antarctica's only defense, and the time has come to be that again. There are 4 new marine protected areas currently being proposed for the Southern Ocean designed to restore ocean health. Today, the Antarctic Peninsula, East Antarctic, and 2 areas of the Weddell Sea represent 13% of the Southern Ocean, the size of the European Union. Now, if we come together and implement these new marine protected areas, it would form the largest act of marine protection in history. It is humbling to see these proposals come from countries as diverse as Chile, Brazil, Argentina, the EU, the US, India, the Republic of Korea, and Australia. And next month, we will need other global leaders to do what those leaders before us did and heed the call of the 86% of the global population wanting to see action. Now, I mention this now not just because it's critical for protecting Antarctica, because it is, or because I'm asking you to advocate for these proposals with your individual governments, because I am, but because before us is a moment that requires unity, a moment to prove to people that the preservation of our planet is bigger than politics, and because I have an expectation bias. Let's protect Antarctica and prove we are capable of protecting our world. Now, I cannot end my time with you today without mentioning my hero, who I discovered when I was 14 years old, Ernest Shackleton. Those who know Shackleton's story will know that he ventured out on several missions, determined to pull off feats that had never been managed before and failed. But in his endeavour to achieve a first, he instead managed to teach the world many lessons in leadership. In fact, he once said, quote, "The quality I look for the most is optimism, especially optimism in the face of reverses and apparent defeat. Optimism is true moral courage," end quote. To keep going is courageous, but it is also necessary. Our survival, the preservation of our lands, our homes, our native flora and fauna all depend on it. So to all of you, keep going. Keep pushing for an end to fossil fuel subsidies, for comprehensive carbon pricing, for the switch to renewables. Keep promoting nature-based solutions and ocean protections. Keep demanding incentives for innovation that speed up the transition. Keep listening to SIDS and supporting their demands and their aspirations. Keep pushing and keep going, but never ever lose the expectation that others will keep going with you, because we must. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Well, that's it. Thank you all very much for making this opening ceremony a fantastic start to Climate Week 2024. I hope you feel as energized as I do after that great roster of speakers and are ready to use this now to get into the weeds of what needs to happen in the coming months between now COP29 and all the way through next year up to COP30. After today, we move into the week. We've got around 900 events in total, and I really want to take everything you've heard today and go and meet as many people as you can to drive that action forward with you. And just ask yourselves, what can my company, my government, my organisation do to really push things forward in the coming year? Because, as you've heard, it's time. Whether it's the 7 actions that we shared with you earlier, whether it's your own initiatives, the key is to take ownership and drive that change. So with that in mind, we look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow and Tuesday at the Hub Live. That's where we're going to dig into the nitty-gritty of all the things that are happening, and we'll be looking for the gaps that we need to fill, the barriers we need to tackle, from how to democratize climate action and how to turn climate transparency and accountability into business opportunities, all the way to how do we deliver on the COP pledges on climate finance and energy efficiency and the role of international standards in the transition. Before we head to our evening reception, I just want to thank again our headline partner, PwC, and our opening ceremony partner, Saint-Gobain. And I just want to take a moment to thank the incredible team behind this week. The Climate Group team plays a crucial role in bringing Climate NYC to life. You probably won't see them, but they're here. I want to say to them a huge thank you for their hard work. Thank you. And all the effort and determination that goes into organising what's going to be the biggest week yet. So everything you see, whether it's branding, food, furniture, through to obviously the agenda, the speakers, the content, reflects this dedication of a really incredibly driven group of individuals. So thank you all very much for joining us. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy the week ahead. Thank you.